Right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Are you all enjoying the SQL pass so far?
Yes.
Yeah. This is a cherry on the top.
We'll
see if the cherry is good or not in a bit.
Are you all happy it's Friday? Right? Sad that you're going to be leaving past Summit, though? No? Nothing? OK. I would be sad that I was going to leave past Summit, but, well, I'm going on honeymoon tonight, so I'll survive. I'm sure I'll find a way. Cool. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. This is What's in a Name? Data Stories That Would Make the Bard Proud. And this is the final session in the data visualization and storytelling pathway. So thank you very much for being here.
And how many of you attended all two sessions? Oh,
Whoa,
quite
cool.
a few. OK. Nice.
How many of you have thought that the learning paths are a really good idea? Yeah. Has anyone, other than this learning path, anyone done any of the other learning paths? Yeah, a couple of you guys? And all good plans. I thought when PASS announced it was a really smart way to handle it. So yeah, it's very nice to see it sort of coming off. Right, well, today we're going to have a little bit more of an informal session. There's fewer slides, less theory, hopefully. More interaction from you guys, so get your questions ready. We'd like to help you guys understand our thought processes and maybe learn some of your thought processes in some of the things we're going to show you today. But let's get through some of the admin stuff first quickly. Yeah. Please silence your cell phones. As I said yesterday, it doesn't disturb me. I'm very disturbed already. But it does disturb the recording, and that's important for all the people who've purchased. And for you guys, hopefully, if you've purchased the sessions, that you can go back and maybe get something out of it. I think by now you've probably heard quite a lot about PASS and all the various things that it has to offer, so we won't really go through anything there. But it really is a good organization. There's a lot going on there. So my name is James. I'm from South Africa. That is my introduction.
And I'm Prathy Kamasani. It's actually Pratyusha Kamasani, whoever can pronounce that. I am from London. I'm a London-based Power BI consultant, nowadays doing a lot of Power Apps. I run London Power BI user group, so if anyone wants free pizza, free beer, and a bit of Power BI, do come and check us out. And yeah, what else? I'm an MVP, which is I'm really, really happy and honored to be part of. And I am also a professional selfie taker, which is why all the data visualizations, colors kind of makes me excited. That's why I'm in the business.
We may have to take a selfie towards the end of the session just to get you all in there. So yeah. We'll get to that.
I'm not sure. Lighting works for me.
Oh, I'm sorry. You see, I mean, she really is a professional. I wasn't thinking about that at all. So sorry, Miss Professional Selfie Taker. Oh, anyway.
No, that is just to add a giggle. Yeah. I'm definitely not a professional selfie.
Just as I'm sure everyone else has reiterated, please fill in your session evaluations for all the sessions you attended. Give feedback, constructive, positive, negative. It all helps us become better speakers. It helps us to refine the sessions and to give you guys more of what you want in terms of sessions going forward and how we plan and execute sessions. So yeah, please do that. So as we've kind of said, this is the last session. We've talked about a lot of theory, a lot of introduction to various visualization techniques, to design theory and strategies. Today, we're going to look at data and how we use it to tell stories and how we use it to really sort of get value out of our data, because a lot of the time, data by itself is interesting for you, the person who knows the domain, who knows what you're looking at. But when you present it to a user, sometimes they get like almost overwhelmed by that data, because it's hard to just extract salient points out of it. So one of the things we're going to look at today is how to take a big data set or a lot of information and condense it down into bite-sized, bullet-sized points that you can ingest and take home and make actionable. So
yeah, well, you pretty much covered most of what we're going to say today. So as James said, the main idea behind this session, this particular session. In the session 1 and in the session 2, we saw how to capture the data. Well, we haven't actually seen how to capture the data, but we saw what are the good principles, how to make how to lay out why the gap is important, why colors are important, and all those things. But even though if you created all those principles, all those design tips gives you a really beautiful report. Just imagine you create a stunning report. But at the end of the day, if your report or your dashboard or your visual, if it's not telling the point, if there is no story on your report, it makes no sense. So that is what we're going to do in this session. What we're trying to do is we're going to look at some open data sets. James has some data sets, and I play with some open data sets. What we're going to show today is how we're going to understand how we open the data, how we're going to understand, and then how we're going to create the stories out of that data. And then we will also look at how we're going to present it and the thought process, why we went in that way, why we presented that way, why we chose those visuals, and what we discovered in each of those steps, how we are creating the story, the narration. So that's the session objective. It's a long, very long way I was trying to explain, but yeah, that's what it is. Over to you.
Thank you. So when we're talking about storytelling in particular, it really is a combination of 3 different parts of data visualization and exploration coming together. It's the data, it's the visuals, but then we add on top of that, we add a narrative or a story. And with just data and visuals, what you can do is you can enlighten your audience, you can show them something. With just data and a narrative, you can explain something. And with just narrative and visuals, you can engage your audience and make them really interested. But when you combine the 3 together, a data, a narrative, and the visuals, that's where you create actionable points, where you create something that the audience will remember and take home. And the quote I'd like to think about here, I cannot for the life of me remember who said it, but it was that people hear statistics, but people live stories. And that's a really good way to think about it, is if you can draw your audience into the data you're presenting, if you can make it real to them, give them something to sort of tangibly feel, you're going to get much better results than just saying 83% of all people do this, 12% of this, and blah, blah, blah. You quickly lose people. You can only remember a certain amount. Stories, the art of storytelling has been passed down through the generations because it's such a great way to convey messages. So how do we build a story? How do we actually do this? And at this point, I just want to give a quick shout out. It's in the bottom corner of this report to Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflick. She wrote a book called Storytelling with Data, which is an excellent, excellent resource. If you get an opportunity, if you're interested in this, read that book. It's not a technical manual. It's not a university dissertation or anything. It's a conversational book that tells you the ins and outs of data visualization, the ins and outs of storytelling, and how to learn the art and going through it. And one of the things she does is she has a 6-point plan for data visualization or data storytelling, that you should go through. And I've kind of adapted it a little bit, but really this is her work, so I'm not taking in credit for this. But
actually, just to add to that, she recently published another book.
Oh, she did.
And that's a good one as well.
The second book is actually called Data Storytelling.
It's art or something.
No, it's called Let's Practice.
Yeah,
so the data storytelling, let's practice. And essentially what it is, it's a practical compendium or addendum to the first book, where you can actually, she gives you a bunch of data. This is the story that you're trying to tell. What is the best way to do it? And then you work through the thought process. It was released a couple of weeks ago, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's very new, but it's out there and ready to go. So I would highly recommend it. She's excellent, and she's great on Twitter. If you're on Twitter and you want someone to follow who's really good, she's amazing, like a really good resource. So what they talk about in this context is actually how to build a story from start to finish. And the first thing is understanding the context. And understanding the context comes with a lot of parts, but essentially it's about understanding your audience, who they are, what they already know, what they need to know, and how to represent the data to them. So, for instance, in a very corporate setting, you would present data in a slightly different way than in a sort of light-hearted, more jovial type of session. Just understanding that you could present the same data in multiple ways. When your data, you can also take cognizance of the data subject. If your data subject is very serious, it's probably important not to trivialize it by putting in light-hearted, flashy graphics, and sort of oppositely, if you've got something that's a little bit less serious, it's fine to play around with it and be a little bit more jovial. So that's one thing about context, is actually just understanding what it is that you're trying to show. Then a couple of things that we've talked about during the various sessions in this pathway. Choosing the right visuals. So Prathy had a whole thing on that on the first day, and how we choose the right visuals to convey the information. And also, yesterday we chatted briefly about cleaning up the visuals and the data and making them clear and concise, and getting rid of 3D bar charts, 3D line charts. I was chatting to someone we were on Twitter last night about the fact that I've recently gone back to a client, or where I initially was employed 10 years ago. And one of the things that happened is when they re-enabled my AD account, I started getting my reporting services subscriptions from 10 years ago when I still used to work there, because they never disabled my email address out of the subscriptions. So I was really pleased to see this thing that I wrote 10 years ago is still working. It's still obviously a business critical thing because they're still sending it out. So I was quite excited. I opened it up for the first time. The first thing I saw, 3D line chart. I was like, oh no, James, what were you doing? So it's also, we learn and we get better as we go along, because wow, it's so bad. I haven't brought the point up to anyone and told them, guys, we can really make this better yet, but I will at some point, because I'm not in the same place anymore, but it's fine. Anyway, so just one little anecdote. And then we also talked about pre-attentive attributes, using size, color, that to draw your audience's attention to the thing that you want them to see. So today, again, we're going to really look at the beginning and the end of this process, is understanding context and telling a story. Okay, so those ones we've done, this is where we are. So Prathy's going to quickly tell us about some of the things we can aid in this process, we can use in Power BI to play around with our storytelling techniques.
Okay, so, well, I think I will leave you this to,
no
because you know
problem.
the slides.
Sorry.
I'm just going to talk about it. So I think, as we mentioned in the very first session, it's like whatever we're going to talk in all these 3 sessions relates to any tools, but as we said, we are focusing on Power BI. And whatever the reports we're going to show today are usually created with Power BI, and the functionalities we used are like bookmarks, buttons, drill through, we don't have much Q&A stuff, but yeah, all these functionalities are the ones we used. So I think what I do actually want to tell is we will talk. I don't want to explain every single topic here, but what we want to do is when we're showing the reports, and if you see something, and if you are not sure about how that's done, just ask us. If you see something interesting, oh, Prathy, how did you do it? Oh, James, how did you do it? Because you can find all the information related to those functionalities on the docs. There is no point of wasting time on that. So, but if you are somebody who don't know, or if you find that, if you think that we did it in a clever way, just ask us. So yeah.
Also, alternatively, if you think that I've designed something really stupidly, please be free to tell me, because we all learn. So you may well go hey, why didn't you think of doing this? Or did you think of doing this, and why did you choose not to? Because that's also a nice conversation point where we can talk about thought process. And maybe the answer is, you know what, actually, I never thought of that. That's a great idea. But maybe it's, yeah, I did think of that, but for X and Y reasons, I decided not to. So I think I said we're not going to do very much theory, and we've spent the first 10 minutes talking about theory. So let's get into some data. Let's play around with the story and see what we can do. I think the first one, and this is interesting. I'm going to go quickly into an exploratory report that I built. Let's see.
That's enough.
Here we go. We have an exploratory report. Now, I talked about this data set yesterday. This is the data set of all the children born in the USA since 1910, between 1910 and 2018. Okay? So it's an open data set. I got it from Kaggle. Also a lovely resource if you're interested in fun open data, well, all open data sets, but there are some fun ones there. Kaggle.com, it's a machine learning and data science website, but one of the things you can do there is you can download various open data sets. So I got this one, and I built a little report for exploration, okay?
Sorry to interrupt, but that looks nice, but how did you get there? I think that's what we want to talk about today.
Well, you see, I thought about a bunch of different questions that people were likely to ask, because with an exploratory report, that's all you can really do. You don't have control over what your users are going to see. You don't really have control over the questions they're going to ask. So what you've got to do, you've got to give them the opportunity to ask as many questions as possible. So in this case, what I did was basically the filters that I have, they're in gray at the top, and I basically try to do that in terms of making them gray, and a little bit, they're not meant to draw attention, they're just meant to be functional. So I've pushed them to the back of the report by using a gray, a dullish color, but I've also styled them all the same way so that somebody can become familiar with the idea that those are all the places where I can change the data. So here we have our 4 filters up the top, or slices, and the reason we've got those things is because those are really the only attributes that I have to play around with this data. Which state was the child born in? What sex was the child? What was their name? But I can't put in a list of 31,595 different names. So I've split it down into 26 categories, which is the initials, okay? You saw yesterday maybe in my report that we had you can add in other types of visuals, but I didn't want to use custom visuals in this specific report. So this is how I've filtered it in this report. So the first thing I did was I basically just built in a bunch of graphs that show different things over time. So, for instance...
to interrupt, because I'm here to interrupt today. That's my job. So, how did you get into the state? Those are the slices you want to put on the top of the report.
Well, I think basically it came down to that was all the options I had
Right.
in this specific case. And I think that's important for data exploration. You want to give your users as many options as you can. So in this case, these are all the options. If I were to show you the data set, you would see that literally there are more slices on this report than there are columns in my data set. So I only, well, no, they're the same number. But essentially, yeah, that's all we can do is we can choose what our users are likely to want and to play with it. So for instance, some of these visuals may not make a lot of sense in this default state, like this first one here, because really it's pretty common knowledge that round about 50% of children born in a specific year will be male and round about 50% will be female. This is not really groundbreaking. We're not going to get much out of that. But it could be interesting to say what would happen if I looked at a specific name, a specific letter. So for instance, if I went to E and just filtered that down, now suddenly that graph makes a little bit more sense, because now you're seeing that if you know that a child is born with the letter E as the first letter of their name, they're far more likely to be female than to be male. Okay, and this is, so we do have to design, and sometimes we have to overcompensate for some of our things and put in visuals that don't always make sense because they may answer a different kind of question. So on that point, what I'd like to do is actually look at that visual and use it to maybe answer a question, because if I clear that E away, I noticed something interesting. If you look towards the end of the tail of that visual, the last 25 to 30 years, it looks fairly flat to me, right? It looks like the number of babies being born every year is kind of staying the same, which is contrary to some opinions that I had in my head. So I thought to myself, you know what? I'm actually interested in this. I want to go and explore this a little bit more and maybe find a story. So let's go here to our data stories and click on this first one here, which is about population growth. So the first thing I did was I just pulled that same visual that we were just looking at and I put it onto a report. Here we have a report. Now, that visual by itself tells me very little.
I see 2 colors.
You see 2 colors. Do you think those colors add any value in this specific thing?
I don't think so, but I still like colors.
Prathy likes colors. Do you think, to the audience, does it make any sense for me to have those 2 colors? Do you know what they represent, firstly?
Gender.
Gender, sex, yes, that is correct. So that's cool. So I've leveraged some common knowledge. I've built in a report that you know what I'm talking about. Do you think they add value? No. Not at this point. I agree with you. I think in this specific graph, there is no longer a point to splitting the number of births up by gender, because as I said before, around about 50% are going to be male and around about 50% are going to be female, and that's not going to change. Nothing we do is going to change that. So unless I'm filtering by some other aspect, and if we think about the various things we have here in terms of years, that's not going to change it. If we talk about which state they were born in, that's not going to change it. So really the only thing here is the name. And in this specific point, I'm not that interested in the names, so I'm going to get rid of those colors and maybe use a different color scheme to help me highlight the data that I'm interested in. So I've moved it to there. Okay, so now what I've done is I've highlighted a different set of the color, and I've added a second graph below it, because this is the preconception that I was talking about that I had before.
Yeah.
I'm under the impression that the population keeps growing. I'm under the impression that due to climate change and environmental stresses and that, it's actually a problem that the population keeps growing. So I'm very surprised to see that the birth rate or the number of babies born each year seems to be relatively stable, not changing since 1980.
So you're saying the number of babies born it's same, but the population is
still growing.
Okay.
That's kind of strange, isn't it? Hey, I was scratching my head about it, and I thought, well, there's a couple of things that could contribute to this. Can somebody tell me what they think would be why this is happening? People are living longer. That's good. That's very good. If we were at...
thinking aliens coming.
You were thinking of aliens coming in? Immigration. Oh, that's the second point that we'd have to maybe consider and think about, because this is a US population, not a global population. So immigration statistics would affect us, okay? So that's also an interesting thing, because immigration, I mean, the way you present a story about immigration could be quite polarizing, could be quite divisive. It could be something that we'd really have to be ethically very certain about before we presented it as data. So my first thought was to get some immigration stats and put them down and see if I could make some sort of correlation. And then when I thought about it, I thought, well, you have to be very careful about that kind of data, and maybe it's not something that should be presented at a conference to people where people may form opinions about what I'm saying. Maybe it's something that I'm not comfortable enough talking about and having people judge or form their own opinions, because maybe I don't have enough time to articulate it. So I left those stats out. But because of that, I felt like I had to articulate that and not draw any other conclusions. So the other thing we thought about is, like Ted and others have mentioned, is that people are living longer. So I've added in a bar chart here, shows that people are in fact living longer, and that is not changing. It's getting longer and longer, up to almost 80 years at the current point in time.
Can I say something? So,
of course.
So initially your story was you had a visual, and then you were not happy with that visual because it's not telling the story well, and then you used a different visual and different colors, and then you saw a different pattern, and then you went to get more data into your model?
Yes, absolutely. So my initial observation about this strange birth rate that I wasn't expecting required that I got 2 new sets of data to help me understand and unpack what actually was going on. And that's why I went and got the US population by year and the average life expectancy. So I added those 2 visuals in, and then you can see with the story that I've written there is that the increasing life expectancy is certainly a contributing factor. But without immigration and emigration data, further analysis is required before drawing any firm conclusions. So this, I'd like to think that sort of in terms of protecting my integrity, my ethical sort of neutrality and all of that kind of thing. I didn't want to present data that could be interpreted as being negative or that could be interpreted as being a socio-political commentary or anything like that. So I've left it off, but I've highlighted it in the story to make sure that everyone is aware that I know that that data exists, but for some reason, and you often can make these decisions in business too, is that I actually can't show you more data this for whatever reason, or we don't know what this data actually would show. So here's a one-pager. This is a complete data story that started from one observation that I made, and then we've enhanced it a bit. We've added some context, and we've added some narration. And I would like to sort of think that by itself, it's a fairly complete data story. Is there anyone who sort of has anything to ask, to comment, to say, I would have preferred you to do this type of thing?
Why did you use bar charts for line?
It's a very good question. There's no real reason why. I like them. Once I used one, I decided to keep all three the same. So the line charts, or if we've done area charts, because you can't really stack line charts as such. So because people stacking line charts, i.e. creating two lines that represent the two distinct values, would be considered a bad data practice because most people would look at it and assume that the one line was representing a complete and the other line was also representing a complete just half the size. So that would be a poor choice of visuals. So I could have chosen an area graph because area graphs are very clear as to whether they're stacked or not. But in this case, I quite like the look of the bar charts, and that's why I chose that one. No other reason. You could easily have used an area chart underneath there. Yes? Cool. That's actually a really great point. And where would you have put that? If you designed this visual, where would you have thought of putting it?
Probably like right above where it's between 1980 and each one of them, so that you could see what the growth rate would be.
Okay. That's cool. That's perfect. Does anyone else have a place where they may have put a growth rate, an average growth rate, where they would have added to the visual? Okay, a trend line, I did think about using a trend line. It's very difficult to put a trend line in Power BI for just a subsection of your data without writing complicated DAX DAX formulas and all kinds of things. So I didn't really want to do that because I didn't want to, this isn't really a DAX class so much. But I could have done that, but that's a good question. But what I like the idea of actually adding in an average growth rate. But where I would do it, and this is my personal choice, is I would have put it into the narration. So where it says the number of babies born per year in the USA has stayed relatively constant per year since 1980, maybe right there you can put in there is 2% fluctuation or plus minus 1% type of thing. When representing a single value, I often like to put it in either a card or in the text, in the narration like itself. And that's also something from Cole's book. But I really love that idea. In fact, I'm definitely going to add that for the next time I do this demo. But that's where I would put it. I would put it inside the narration. And I hope that kind of makes sense to people.
Yeah, I think I quite like because you added that extra bit of narration and also the navigation to explain the data for your users, because you probably know your data very well, but like the person who is accessing it doesn't know it. So I think this is something that we do want to highlight in this session, is like in Power BI, there are some text visuals, and this visual is a narrative story, isn't it?
No, that's just a normal text box because it's fixed data. That's just
right,
but yes, you could, and just now we will see an example of one using the story. What is it called? Is it narrative story visual, which you can use, and I'll show you one just now that does it. Yes.
Could you talk about why you chose the year range?
Um,
Everything left in 1920 is fairly suspect. You have 100 million people in the U.S. that time, only 500,000 babies.
Sorry, but let's. This is a very good question. Okay, so why did I choose to highlight the 1980? There's two questions here. So firstly, the question is basically, why did we choose to highlight 1980 onwards, and then what are we thinking about the babies at the bottom? And this is also a very...
About why you included data prior to 1920 when it looks so.
Okay, well, so I got this data off a data source. Must say I did not verify anything. I did check the Social Security number data from the U.S. Census Bureau. That one I'm certain of. The second one, the population growth, that actually came from a website called something. It's there at the bottom, thankfully. And I did not verify it. So potentially, I mean, you may well be right that there's something wrong with that data. But
So your question was, why did you include it if it's not? Yeah, well, I think that's a very good question. And I think that's something we could learn from that report is like if your data is something that you're not happy about, then probably just don't show it. But many times, probably when you want to give full picture, you may want to show the entire data set, especially when you're doing data journalism and things like that. Even though you have the wrong data, you are not somebody who would decide what to. So I think in a business case, if I were you, I would totally remove the data which makes no sense. Yes.
So I have a potential answer for why that looks weird. And if it's Social Security card applications, they didn't come out until 1935. So it would have been only the people who were alive at that point in time. So anybody who died prior to 1935, as in children who died before then, probably would not be counted.
So if anyone didn't hear that, that's an excellent piece of additional information, which I had no idea about, is that Social Security numbers were only introduced in the mid-1930s. So applications for Social Security numbers would only have started in that time, and potentially all children who had not made it to the age of 15 or whatever their age was at the time would not have had to apply. So potentially those numbers are underrepresented. But that's a very good thing to know because I had no idea. So I would never have been able to add that kind of context to this report. But it's also amazing in this thing is because someone else has picked up and gone, hey, you know what, actually, that data doesn't kind of make sense. I need to ask questions about it, which is an excellent thing to do because it challenges our own assumptions too, and we make sure that we're not representing something in an incorrect or invalid way. So I think if we're all happy, can we move on to, we got some more stories to tell, so I'd like to keep moving, but we can come back and ask more questions as we go along. Let's go back to our sort of, so here's this is the one we've just talked about. There's one thing I want to talk about before we go on to the next story, and I'm sorry for going back to a little bit of theory, but one of the reasons I got into data initially, and one of the reasons why I actually enjoyed it more than some people do, is that I found that data gave me a chance to be creative. So when I was in university, I did a lot of theater, I sung, I still do, I sing in a choir, and I do have sort of a creative side and something that needs a little bit of outlet. And I find that data gave me a little chance to do this. This is why I could create 3D line charts when I was young. I could play around and maybe I didn't know what I was doing, but I did at least. It was something for me to be creative and play around. So one of the things that's interesting is that the narrative arc or the story that we're telling with our data is exactly the same whether we're talking about a data story or actually a theater story, a play, a book, a novel. And this is sort of a well-defined concept, the narrative arc. And every story in the entire world basically follows this arc. One, there is what we call exposition. Exposition is who are we, what are we doing, what is the sort of background to the story. Secondly, we have a rising action. Now generally, if we talk about sort of mainstream comedy or sort of action movies, generally in the rising action, things are going well. Everything is under control, things are going well, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. Then something happens. Now that point is called the climax, okay? Now often in stories, the climax actually happens very early. The climax doesn't mean it's the end. It means it's the point at which something happened that changed everything, okay? And it's the moment in the story where something happened. In Shakespeare, it's when King Lear descends into madness. In In comedies, it's when the girl finds out that the guy has in some way been lying to her and she gets all upset and leaves him. Whatever it is, in all of these stories, something happens that shapes the rest of the story. And then there's two more steps, and one is what we call the falling action, and the falling action is where most of everything happens. It's the conflict, it's the resolution of the rest of the story, and then we have the denouement, which is the resolution. Okay, so that is what we call the narrative arc. Now, this is a story, this is obviously how you write stories, but now how can we apply that to data storytelling? Well, what is our exposition? Our exposition is providing context. So in everywhere we present data, we've always got to provide some sort of context. Where did we get the data from? What is it showing? All that kind of stuff, okay? Secondly, what is the rising action? So what is my assumption? What is the thing that I think is happening, or what was happening up until a point? And then something happened that I'm interested in. That is our climax. That is the hypothesis or the question that I want to ask. Our falling action is the resolution of that and the explaining as to how we either proved or disproved our hypothesis. And then the denouement is the moment or the takeaway action that we give to a client, to a customer, or to a user to do something about it, or to show how it may or may be changed or may be influenced. So again, sorry, just a couple of minutes of theory. I'm not going to go into much detail about that. But it is something to keep in mind, because there are these 5 steps, and they are quite important for actually building this, for building our stories. So we can switch over to you now, Prathy. I'd like you to sort of show us a story that you've built, and we're going to have a look at that and see what's going on there. So
Yeah, so it's 3.
There
Well,
we
I
go.
don't have the entire step-by-step story, but I do want to talk about how I approached this thing when I was designing it. So this is something I designed like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I think, like just when bookmarks released. No amazing functionalities of bookmarks now we have, like no buttons and things like that, but this is something. So what this is it's a UK price paid data. So all the house prices of the UK. And so when I came up with I just want to play with that data. So what we had the UK price data. And we see there is London is pretty expensive, and why? What is other things which are impacting on the price? So that's when we thought, okay, so Ofsted data is the school's rating in the UK. So every school gets a rating. So is anyone from UK here? Okay, so you probably know Ofsted. So Ofsted data is the UK data. So how I was checking, is anything impacting the Ofsted data and the UK price data? So for the example, this particular report, I don't want to give any, I don't want to put an output there. What I tried in this report is to actually make an exploration report. It's like this is the kind of report you probably design for data analysts. So you give a lot of data to your data analyst, and then you let them explore around that data. So what we did here is so just to make it easy for the users, as I got here some schools, properties, and the schools and prices. So what we have here is when I hover over it, it gives me saying, okay, click here to link, follow the link. So that basically gives me, okay, I can click on that takes me to another page. And here I have again, now I have a navigation bar here, I have some key metrics there, and I have created few more bookmarks here to navigate around it, and also see how the postcodes are happening. And I have the ratings here to see how many, for example, for this postcode, how many outstanding schools are there, and what it covers, the percentage and things like that. So for the people who don't know this data, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But basically what we did is so just create something where users can go and play with it. So we have some.
Sorry, can I interrupt you for a second? I just want to point out something or ask you some things. This is a really beautiful report. I think you can all agree this is really, really well designed, and it leverages all the things we talked about. But how did you do this sort of round graph on the top? What is?
So this is a good question, and I get this question asked so many times because I published this on my blog, as I have like a little portfolio on the blog, and no one asks me about not like really no one asks me. The most questions I've ever received on my blog is asking what visual is that? So before I actually talk about what visual is that, I just want to talk about like how I get where I get the inspiration of actually why did I go for that kind of layout. So, and I do want to talk a bit about like how I design the layout as well. And this is what we will come back to the stories again. So to get the inspiration, what I use is I have a whole bunch of reports that I pinned on the Pinterest. So this particular one, maybe if I scroll down somewhere, I may be able to find it. Let me see. If I'm lucky, I may find it. What's it? OK.
Stop.
OK, somewhere. Well, this is somewhere over here.
There we are. There it is in the middle.
Well, this is not exactly where I got that from, but this is also kind of looks like that. So what I did is so I went on this my inspirational wall, and where I saw, OK, this visual looks really interesting. So and that's when I come back to my Power BI and see oh, this is not what I want. I don't want you to judge me on my Pinterest wall, but. What I thought, OK, this looks really nice. Is there a way I can do that one in Power BI? So the kind of person I am is I always try to find workarounds. So how can I do this in Power BI? So I went for the layout. I will talk about layout in a second. But what I thought is, why don't I just create something because we have donut charts. So what I did, I created my measures in a way to have various donut charts. I resized my donut charts to have a one on the top, a one after other, removed all the background, and I created my measures to show two values. One is the rating I want. The other one is the other value. I changed the other value as the background color, but I don't want users to come and just click on it. So that's why I kept this blank panel on the top, so they just not cross-filter other things and some other pop-up windows doesn't come up. And,
so are you saying that actually that's a whole bunch of visuals? That's not one visual. That's a whole bunch of visuals that you've just formatted to make it look like another visual. That's really cool.
Yeah, just so it shows what I wanted to, the kind of layout I was going for. But I need a way to tell the users this is what it is, because what I have here is just a few circles, off circles, and things like that. But that doesn't actually make sense, especially I don't have a tooltip. So for that reason, what I did is I added little circles, and I added a KPI, a key metric next to it, to show what is that circle value is. So I created that block there, and I showed it there. So that's what happened there.
Awesome. So cool.
So the other thing, don't save. Probably one more thing I could show here is the few other things I also did is, this is something I like to show is we have conditional formatting available in Power BI. How many of you use conditional formatting in Power BI? So conditional formatting is a great thing. And as I mentioned in the first session, conditional formatting lets you highlight the values you want your users to focus on. So we used two types of conditional formatting, actually 3 types of conditional formatting in this page. The one is the overall effectiveness star rating. I don't have to talk much about it because users quite easily understand the rating because we are very used to it. The other thing is these little data bars you see here. what I want to show is I want to highlight outstanding ones. So here, well, not only outstanding ones, the other ones, but outstanding ones is something that I am interested in. So for that, to get that little bar, what I did is in the conditional formatting, you can use foreground, which is font color, and the background. So the same logic I used for the foreground and the background. And once I used that one, what I did is, let me see if I can show it. So this is basically how my column was. I used the same font color, same background color. Once I had done that, I just resized my column to look like a little bar. So this is a very subtle way to show what is the highlighting that I wanted to do. And also the next one is data bars, which you can always see it. So yeah, that's another kind of a story that I was playing with.
I love it. Good job.
Thank you.
Right. I'm going to come back to my machine quickly. Where's that one? I think, is that my machine? Cool. OK, let's hop back into Power BI. Let's tell another story. So one of the things I also noticed when we were looking at our exploratory report, is this big drop off in this bottom right-hand visual. Can you all see which one? I'm sort of moving my mouse over there. There's this massive drop here. And I was interested in what that was doing and why it was happening. So I thought, let's see if there's a story to do with all of that. So if we go back to our data stories and we click on that story, I basically took that visual and one other visual that's related to it, and I threw them into my report to start talking about it. Now here you can see I did use an area chart rather than a bar chart, just different design choice in this case. Let me quickly explain what these two graphs are showing. The first one is basically showing how many unique names there are per year. So how many different names were given to babies per year. Pretty easy, nice to see. The second one is basically I took the 10 most popular names in any given year, and I said to myself, what percentage of babies had one of those 10 names, okay? Because what I did see was that some very, very traditional English names, British names, and biblical names were super, super apparent in the early years of data. So there were lots of James, John, Michael, Daniel type of names going on. In fact, if you look at this data, you can see that up to 36, almost 37% of all men born in 1910 had one of 10 names. So if you were walking around and you walked into somebody, there was more than a 1 in 3 chance that they would have one of 10 names. That's how sort of undiverse or how narrow the naming conventions were at that time. And this also can give you some advice. Is if you walk into someone who's 109 years old, you know that they have a 1 in 3 chance of being one of those 10 names. So you know, when you find those 109-year-olds, just that may help you. But that by itself doesn't really show me much. But what I was interested in is how in the last 10 years or so, the number of females who had one of the most popular names has, for the first time ever, overtaken one of the number of males, or the percentage of males, should I say. And it's quite interesting. And then I went and looked what were the 10 most popular names over the last 10 years or so for females. And actually their names: Olivia, Sophia, Isabella, Emily, Emma. It's basically those are the sort of 10 names that we were looking at. And then I thought about all my kids, my friends' kids, and their names, and basically every one of them has one of those 10 names. So I was like, yeah, actually this data is pretty representative, even in South Africa. So it was interesting to see that. But what I did was I added a couple more data points here just to see if we could see anything. So the first thing is I wanted to see if there was any geographical pattern that showed some additional info to this. And, well, that graph showing geographical data on a map seems like a good idea. But what do you think of that, Prathy? Do you think it's adding any value? Do you think it's easy to understand?
Well, Well, I don't know U.S. geography that much, but I think I do understand a bit. But I'm not sure it's adding much value to it.
Does anyone here think that those graphs are really adding any value? Can you tell a lot from those two graphs? Not really, not really. So this is basically what I was thinking here, is that even when we follow what are basically the rules, the rule is if you're showing geographical data, try and show it on a map. It's the most representative way to show data, because it gives us some idea of a number of other things like scale and size and geographical proximity, so we can see supersets. But in this case, I didn't think that helped a lot. So I tried something different. And I showed the exact same data. Ooh, what's that? Oh, okay. I showed the exact same data, just in a data table. And I thought this was better, okay? But before I sort of made that decision, I did realize that there was a trade-off. And there's one big trade-off here, and especially for me, is that I don't really know US geography that well, as sort of Prathy was just saying. So when I look at a table like that, I can't automatically go, oh, this is here and this is there, and maybe look at the top 5 or 6 and go, oh, these are all concentrated together, because I don't know the states that well. So here's a trade-off. And I had to sort of play with these two decisions and say, do I think one's better or the other's better? But at the end of the day, I thought this visual actually showed the point that I was more interested in making better than the other visual. And there are 3 reasons for that. One is that I have a combined view, which I didn't have in the two shape maps. Okay? Secondly, I can plot the exact same states against each other by using some conditional formatting. Now, also just maybe a little trick as to how I've done that. There are not multiple columns there, or there are not 4 or 5 columns there. There's only 2 columns that I've done. I've just left and right justified my data in different opposite ways, and had my bars going from different directions. One's going from the left, one's going from the right, in terms of my thing. So I thought that this was an easier way to understand the data that I was trying to show and the story I was trying to tell. So once I had that, it was pretty easy for me to just add in some text, a little bit of narration that explains what it is, the story that I was trying to show, is that there was, from 1910 until 2008, there's a fairly steady increase in the number of names assigned to babies. But however, in the last 10 years, it seems that everyone's getting a little bit less adventurous, less imaginative. So that was the first little mini story. The second story was that previously, females have always had a much larger variety of names, with the gap widening over time. So if you look at that first graph in the top left-hand corner for you guys, you can see the gap was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, also up until around about 2008, where it started to narrow. Because, well, I don't know why, because there's no data that tells us what's happening there, but it's interesting to see. So there's 2 things that have happened. One is that the names are becoming, the higher percentage of names becoming more popular, and also that there are few and unique names being assigned. And then the last one was, historically, we had this concentration of popular names, and then I've just put in a little definition there so that someone reading this report for the first time would be able to understand what I'm talking about. Has been twice as large in men. However, in 2009, for the first time, women actually had a higher percentage. So here's a little, I mean, I don't know that this story is that interesting, but it is a data story that we've told by looking at some data. I'm coming to you in 1 second. Give me a thing.
So is there anything else impacting on the names? Did you find anything else, like working, like,
well,
having that kind of unique names?
There's quite a lot of other things going on here. Is that I think one of the things is one of the things we touched on yesterday, is that there is an influence of names coming from foreign languages that is potentially changing this, and it's most apparent when looking at how names change over time, but I think it could also contribute to the diversity. I did go and look up a couple of names that would be coming from South Africa, specifically, that would come, and I did notice that 1 or 2 of them are starting to appear, names that you definitely would not associate with traditional sort of US names, like Tsepiso or Zolani. These names that are quite different and unique, but having a little bit of outside knowledge, I know where they're coming from. And it's clear that this effect of the global village or globalization is having an
Netflix.
effect. And potentially Netflix. I say maybe you're right. Maybe it has nothing to do with people moving. It's just people hear a cool name. They're like, hey, that's a really cool name. But that doesn't explain Apple or like, some other interesting celebrity name. So, well, but hey, it's difficult to say, and I don't really want to make any sort of commentary on why these things are happening, but it is interesting to see that this kind of thing is changing over time, and certainly the effect of biblical names and or English monarch, royal type of names is definitely decreasing over time. Not to such a point that it's not the top 10. I mean, if you looked at that first report that we had, you can still see that the top 10 most popular male names, those are some very regal names. James, it's an amazing, it's a great name. What kind of bias? I would never be biased. You're talking about ethics the whole session. No, but yeah, no. But even if you look at the names, Mary, Patricia, Elizabeth, the female names, they're all very heavily influenced by Old English literature and royalty and the Bible. So yeah, we can draw some conclusions from that. Let's go back and see if there's what else we can move on here. Here's a little bit more of a fun demo. We're going to play through this for 5 minutes. What do we think? Do we think that movies, culture, TV series, and that could affect the way people name their children? Yeah, I've seen quite a few nods here. Would you like to see whether this is true or not? I mean, now we've got a guess. Let's have a look. So let's go into this. Let's go and look at the effects of pop culture. Here's a report. Okay, so I've got 4 TV shows here. Friends, Lord of the Rings, TV shows and or movies. Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter. Okay, very iconic sort of big things that have happened in the last couple of years. I built this report really for this kind of session. I've given the session a couple of times in various places. What I like about this is adding in some other interesting little visual things here with the pictures as our slices rather than having just names and that, with using this visual that we were talking about, the storytelling visual, where you can get your text modified by the visual itself and add in various formatting and that kind of thing. So let's have a look and start playing around with Friends. How many people here enjoyed Friends or Friends fans? Yeah? Okay, I can definitely count myself in that clue. That's probably why I put it in here. So I thought it was quite interesting to know, was there sort of a noticeable effect that Friends had on the names? Okay, so here's the first one, Phoebe. Phoebe, I wouldn't call Phoebe the most popular character in Friends, but pretty much nobody hated her. Okay, so I thought, okay, she probably had a relatively positive effect. But if we look at this graph here, it seems, and we're looking at only one data point at this point in time, but it does seem that there's a massive spike in the number of girls born and given the name of Phoebe since 1994. Now, correlation is not causation. So I'm not going to go out here and say that, wow, Friends definitely influence this naming trend. But here's one data point, and it's an interesting one to see. Phoebe definitely got more popular and is still getting more popular as time goes on, except for maybe the last 2 years. It's sort of just tailed off a little bit. Okay, let's look at another one. I'm going to skip Joey because, spoiler alert, Joey doesn't really have any interesting data. Let's have a look at Chandler. Okay, Chandler as a name, Chandler. Chandler Bing. There's quite a noticeable thing here. In fact, of the 10 most popular years for Chandler as a name in the US, 9 of them were while Friends was on TV. Okay, again, I can't with 100% confidence say that this had any effect, but I would like to think there's a fairly strong correlation there, especially because of the fact that this increased up to the start of the series, was very popular, and then immediately decreased afterwards. So here's one that I was like, okay, cool. So you think Friends maybe had a positive influence for all 6 names? Is that the kind of trend we're starting to see here? Who would be willing to go out on a limb and say that all 6 names probably saw big increases? No? Oh, we got one at the back there. I would like to tell you the story of the name of Rachel. Rachel was a popular name before Friends started. In fact, it was one of the more popular names going into the series. She was chosen in Series 1, Series 2, and Series 3. It got more popular. Rachel broke up with Ross at the end of Series 3. Her name plummeted. Look at it. The data is there. It plummeted. It was a terrible decision for all people named Rachel for her to break up with Ross. Okay?
What happened to Ross?
What happened to Ross? That's also a good question. Let's have a look. Ross was a declining in popularity name before the start of Friends. Season 1, 2, and 3, Ross got more popular. Ross and Rachel broke up. Ross fell off a cliff.
Oh.
It's really bad for the name Ross too. So clearly this was a hugely significant pop culture event. Ross and Rachel breaking up had a noticeable effect on the naming culture in the whole of the USA. Warner Brothers, obviously we're onto a winner here. Again, I have nothing to back up those two assertions, but I think they're great. That is like one of my favorite things that I ever found in any piece of data. So Ross and Rachel breaking up, hugely significant moment in the history of the Earth. Okay, maybe I'm overselling it a little bit. But
I think one thing what we learn from this thing is like, how you can make your data very interesting. It's like see how we started with the plain data, how many babies were born and what the names were given to the babies. And then we found something like what are the unique names. And then we added like geographical information and the other information, and then we added with other things. So it's like you can make your data really, really interesting. So, and how you make your stories, and while playing with your data, you find your own stories, the patterns and everything. Yeah, I don't want to interrupt.
No, absolutely. I mean, what Prathy's just said is so important because, to be honest, if I showed you data about Ross, the name Ross, and just told you a story without any reference to something you could all relate to, it would be pretty boring. In 1995, it worked better. In 1996, it got better. In 1997, it went down. Like, that has no cultural significance. It has nothing. So it's so important to add context to our data, to add something that people can relate to and people can, go away and take away from this session. Because I promise you, of all the things we've talked about, you're not going to remember any of the theory. Well, maybe you'll remember some of the theory, but you're going to remember that Ross and Rachel breaking up was a significant point in history, okay? So anyway, so before we're starting to sort of run a little short on time, so I'd like to quickly pop through to, yeah, question.
They were taking a break.
They were taking a break. They were taking a break. You're quite right. Yes.
Is there any thought behind where you're putting the narrative on here to direct the story? Before you had upper right, have it over here.
No, to be honest, that I didn't really consider it. I thought the point here is the context that I'd like to give, because this is less of this is kind of less of an explanatory report, or it's kind of halfway between, because there's explanation, but there's also the ability to change. And the visuals have to cater for all scenarios, okay? So the context I tried to give is the first thing that you read naturally. It's kind of the biggest thing. You can read the story. It's got the most pre-attentive attributes in it. So I would expect someone to interacting with this report for the first time to first read the story and then look at the visuals. Okay, so that's kind of also plays into where we would put it on the left rather than the right. But it's not. That wasn't. It was a semi-conscious decision as such. I thought in this pace that is the important thing that I want people to see.
But that's a very, very good question.
Yeah, it's a great question.
And that is something to be mindful of when you're designing your reports. Is like where you're keeping your slices and how you're. Like that is something just Charles' principles is also about, is like, you want to group things, and you also find the patterns in your data. Is like once you keep your slices on the top and then you keep slices on the left, your users, it's the user experience is not great. So when you're designing your reports, I think that's something, it is quite important to remember. Can I quickly show one thing?
Yeah, sure, go through. We'll go back to Game of
narration?
Thrones in a second.
Yeah, it's like so this is just because you talked about the narration, and that reminded me of this report. So this is something I created. I don't even remember why I created this. Yeah, for some reason I created, because my evenings were boring, so probably that's why I created. And so this was, oh yeah, this is Information Beautiful Awards data set. So they were giving some awards. The prize was big, so I got greedy. But at the end, I forgot to put their logo on it, and then they never even considered my.
Oh.
So, but what I'm trying to say here is like, so this is a report where I am adding the narration, yeah? And also I have a bit of explanation here. So what we have here is I managed to group the narration so that, like, you will kind of understand. So for example, if you see here, this is a narrative visual in the Power BI, and because we have the narration right under that big title, and that kind of explains, okay, that narrations belongs to the everything under that one. So it depends where you want to keep it, but like as long as you group it, whatever the way you choose, with a background, with font colors or something, always keep the narration and the labels and things together so it makes sense. So this is an example I wanted to show you.
I just wanted to ask you a question here. This is pretty much like an infographic that you've
Yes,
created here.
yeah.
How do you do that in Power BI? Because I don't know, has anyone ever seen anything like this in Power BI before?
So this is a Power BI, and this is an infographic, and that's something I want to carry away from that thing. Is like, so far we saw, like, we pulled up so much data, we created data sets, story points, and we figured out something. And if that is the story I want to tell, how friends influence the baby names, that's when probably I want to create an infographic because that's the only story I want to tell. And that's when infographic comes really, really handy. The report you saw before there, I want users to go and explore themselves. Here, I don't want the users to go and explore themselves. I'm just going to go and show you my findings. So to create this report, what I did is this is actually. So how many of you use tooltips in Power BI? Yeah? If you created a tooltip, then you should know how to create infographic as well. It's nothing but I created this page, went here, and the page size, I chose the custom. And a different page size, and that happens. But to get here, to get to that layout, and again, I have my long list of visuals on my Pinterest. I have a long list of palettes that I follow. So in here, I just wanted to use few colors. I don't want to put so much colors in it. I want to highlight. I want to highlighted color and few other colors. And I just basically I went for one of the palettes, something like this, or like something like this, and used those colors. Created my Power BI theme from that. And then what I always use is Canva. Anyone heard of Canva? Yeah, I like that smile on your face, because Canva kind of makes you happy. So it's like, so what I do with the Canva is like, I go to Canva, I create my design, so I can it's free tool. I would totally say go and do it. So I create a presentation layout, for example, and what I do is I go to Elements. And this is as we saw yesterday, grid layout is the go-to layout. So I just use this kind of grid layout and just change the colors to something sensible quickly, because our time is not great. And then I just download this one, download it as a PNG onto my drive. And what I do is, I don't have Power BI Desktop open, but what we do is, I go here, I go to page background. Well, not this one, but maybe I could show you something else, because I'm not using the page background there, but let me show you something else, mass gun shooting. And if I go to Edit Report, go back here, page background. So as you can see here, what I did is I uploaded that image, the background image, as a wallpaper, the background for my report. So what I have here is everything you see here is like various visuals. But in the background, what I have is just a page. And I'm not like, what I am doing is because I kind of already know how I want to lay out my report. Once I find the pattern in my data, what I do is I figure out how I want to lay out it. So for example, for this particular report, I figured out how I want to lay out. And then I thought, OK, I'm just going to use the top layout to put some key metrics and some visuals. And then this is where I want to keep all my reports. There I am giving the metrics, and this is where the reports. But I used buttons over here as my navigation. So, and I added that kind of hover over effect. So I'm kind of telling users, is like there is something happens here. Sometimes narration is good, but sometimes it's not great. Like, you don't want to clutter your report, but maybe do something else, like, this kind of hover over effect to tell the users, go and click on it. So when you go and click on this one, that gives you another visual. So it's about how you want to present, how you want to tell the story. And there is many places where you can where you can get the data and the inspiration from.
Well, so I really love this because it leads very nicely into a point about talking about trade-offs. Because one of the things we do have to consider is, yesterday I talked about accessibility and how we design for everyone. But in terms of making beautiful reports, sometimes the only way we can make beautiful reports is to hack and slash a little bit and to sort of play around. And some of those things, like when we looked earlier at the overlaying multiple visuals from each other, it's very difficult, for instance, to do that and still maintain our accessibility standards, because now we can't do tabs and things like that. So it's a hard thing to know, and it's a hard thing to work with, is deciding on which trade-offs to make when in terms of our stories. And this is why context is so important, because if you know exactly who's going to be using your report, exactly how it's going to be consumed, it's okay to sometimes ignore some of the things that we've maybe learned, because we know that we're not dealing with them. However, if you are publishing something onto the open web and you have no control over who's going to see it and who's that, we have to be maybe a little bit more conservative in what we do. So maybe it's a good thing. You want to show something else?
No, I'm just like
okay.
thinking of
So
something else.
I'm going to quickly pop back just one more time, because I just think people will enjoy this. So we're going to end off maybe with one last little look at some pop culture. Let's go and have a look at Game of Thrones. I'm going to move away from Khaleesi and pretend you didn't see it yet. So Game of Thrones is a very, very popular, obviously very important sort of social, cultural thing at the moment, and over the last 5 to 8 years. And it's clearly visible in all of this, because of the fact that, because it's a fantasy series, a lot of the names and a lot of the characters are non-standard, non-common names. So here is one where I can, with definite confidence, show some correlation and some causation. So I'm going to start with Arya, because to provide context and for ethical reasons, some of the names, not ethical reasons, but for fairness and transparency, some names did exist prior to Game of Thrones. So Arya is a name that was in the US, and up to almost 250 babies were born in sort of 2010. Now, the highlighted years that I'm talking about here are only the years that the TV show was on, not the book. So could we maybe say maybe those first names were even influenced prior to the TV series because the book had already been released? Maybe. But the TV series really is the cultural thing that I'm talking about here. So you can see there is a absolute marked increase in the number. It is a 10 times increase in the number of babies born named Arya from 2018 down to 2010. 8 years, a 10 times increase. I think that is almost statistically valid enough that we don't have to add any other context. But just in case it's not, because I'm not a statistician and I don't want to step on any statistician's toes, let's look at some names that didn't exist prior. So let's start with Khaleesi. Khaleesi, there were 0 children born named Khaleesi prior to the TV show Game of Thrones. 0. Not one across the entire United States of America. Since then, we have got up to a case where last year there were 517 children born and named Khaleesi, all of them female. I think this now, hopefully, is enough statistical proof to say, there is no correlation here. This is causation. People love the fact that it's a strong female character, and they are giving their little girls a strong female name.
I wonder what happens after watching the last series.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to pass judgment on people who name their children Khaleesi, because there's some things that go on there that I wouldn't be super happy to be related. But it is interesting to see. And of course, Khaleesi had other titles and or names in the series. And this is another one. Daenerys was not a name that existed. No one had ever... It had never been appeared in print as a word prior to George R.R. Martin releasing Game of Thrones. So this, again, is one where we can, with absolute certainty, say that it was influenced. But even though this visual is almost exactly the same as the previous one, we do have to pay cognizance to our axes here, because only 80 children were born and given the name Daenerys. So this is a far less marked effect, even though it looks very similar. And this is also just one that was kind of important that I just wanted to end off on this note, is to always have a look and consider the data that you're presenting and that you're telling your story, that you're not over-representing a tiny sample size or something that may not be quite so significant. I don't know if there's anything else.
I think one thing I would love to add before we'll take questions afterwards is I personally love data visualizations, and I think if I just look my own data visualizations compared to now, it got better just because of practice. And I think the only thing I would say is go and play with the data. There are so many open data sets available out there, and especially if you're somebody who is interested in data. And actually, let me quickly switch over and show you something. Is if you actually somebody interested, that's not going to work, but make a portfolio. Like how CV is important for any career, if you're in data visualization, portfolio is important. So anywhere on the Power BI website or anywhere, play with the open data and make a portfolio for yourself, and it helps you. It helped me a lot. I'm sure it would help everyone. But on that note, thank you so much. Hope you learned something, enjoyed something, saw some interesting facts. And please leave the feedback. And we are here if you have any questions. And if you find something interesting, if you want to know how it's been done or anything, yeah, we'll be here. Thank you.